Bouge ton corps, ton cœur, ton allure, ton espace, ta devanture. Bouge adossé en t'étendant, pour ton bien c'est évident. Bouge tes os, ta masse, ta structure, tes côtes, ton ossature. Bouge en cadence et en élan, c'est égal tant que c'est lent. Bouge en effort, en à-coup, en dur, en sueur, en démesure. Bouge à bout de souffle en étant souple verticalement.
The song you heard at the top of the show was Bouge by Marie Fouton. Marie Fouton's music is a mesmerizing collision of diverse mediums, evoking a kaleidoscopic glass castle where reflections intertwine endlessly, each revealing new perspectives. Her compositions serve as a nexus of creative energies, akin to a palace of mirrors, reflections within reflections, multiplying perspectives. Adept in music, singing, ceramics, and pastels, she navigates her creative process with unbridled freedom and vivacity. Driven by the innate urge to communicate, sing, and illuminate her unique worldview, Maureen provided this statement about the song. This is the first track of my new record, and it was released June 7th. It's a song about movement, how moving our body enables us to process things in life, to feel emotions deeply. Moving ourselves enables us to step forward while acknowledging everything that happens inside. I create to make things move inside, outside of me. We'll post a link to Bouge on our social media feeds and in the show notes for this episode on our Patreon page. You can find more music by Maureen Fouton on all streaming platforms or at Maureen Fouton, that's MarinFutin.com. Thanks for sharing your work with us, Maureen. Merci beaucoup. And we are celebrating solidarity because that is the only way we win, is by joining together, turning ancient enemies into allies and friends and building coalitions. Ukrainians knew it in Euromaidan. It was a diverse coalition from people from all across society that joined on that square to drive Kremlin puppet Yanukovych out of town and into Russia, where he remains in exile to this day. And that's the only way we win, is by building solidarity, coalitions to drive the other Russian asset, Russian puppet, Donald Trump, out of America and into exile into Russia where he belongs. But how do we build solidarity with everything so polarized? Well, we're going to have that discussion in this week's show, featuring the wonderful experts on building social movements and sustaining them. And they're here to talk about their book, Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea. And their names are Leah Hunt-Hendrix and Astra Taylor. Leah Hunt-Hendrix was born and raised in New York City. She has a PhD in religion, ethics, and politics from Princeton University, where she wrote her dissertation on the ethics of solidarity. Leah has founded multiple organizations that have impacted the American political landscape. In 2012, she co-founded Solidaire, a national network of philanthropists dedicated to funding progressive movements. And in 2017, she co-founded Way to Win, a network with a similar structure, this time dedicated to electoral strategy. Both organizations are grounded in building solidarity between major donors and grassroots organizing. Astra Taylor is co-founder of the Debt Collective, a union of debtors. She is the director of numerous documentaries and the author of The Age of Insecurity, Coming Together as Things Fall Apart. Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone, and The People's Platform, winner of an American Book Award, among other works. Her writing has appeared in periodicals including The New Yorker, The New York Times, N+1, and The Baffler. She is an advisor to Lux Magazine and is on the editorial board of Hammer and Hope. She was the 2023 CBC Massey Lecturer. And before I get to the interview, I want, in the spirit of solidarity, I would like to thank the French for their help with the American Revolution. The Continental Army, especially under a beleaguered General George Washington, was a disaster, a ragtag group where so many people had to sacrifice their lives because it was just, we were so outgunned. I live in Brooklyn, right where the Battle of Brooklyn took place. It was an absolute bloodbath by the British Empire. New York Harbor looked like all of London had descended on it with the British naval power coming in to clamp down on this little uprising. And the French came in being the French and be like, you know what? We're going to fix this. The French provided supplies, arms, ammunition, uniforms, and most importantly, troops and naval power. They were instrumental in finally getting the British to surrender at Yorktown in 1781. We could not have had the American Revolution without our French allies. And say what you will about America, it's an experiment that is ongoing. We're always trying to improve it. And the French saw the vision in it, but they're also probably really petty and wanting to get back at the British. Let's be real here. But every time I see the statue of Lafayette, the great revolutionary French hero, who then went on to be one of many, countless many, swept up and arrested during the terror of the French Revolution. That man lived an extraordinary life. When I see his statue in Prospect Park here in Brooklyn, it's a wonderful reminder that none of us can get through this alone. We need our allies, we need our coalitions, we need our solidarity, and we have to build that despite our differences, despite how the different languages we speak, even politically, despite our different upbringings. We have to find a common cause. And that common cause is that the oligarchs, the fascist oligarchs that we're up against, they're coming for everybody. They're coming for all of us. So we all have to unite or die. We're all in this together. Happy Independence Day, everyone. I've been looking forward to this for so long because you two met at Occupy Wall Street. Tell me about that, because I have a lot to say about that. Occupy Wall Street. That is not about your meet cute, but please tell me, how did you two meet?
So I went down to Occupy Wall Street. I was working on my PhD actually at the time, and living in New York, and while writing my dissertation from Brooklyn while I was doing my PhD at Princeton. And Occupy started, and I was really interested in social movements. And so was like, we have a social movement like happening right in front of us. So went to check it out and just started hanging around and sussing out like how things were happening and who was doing what. And there were lots of different working groups. And over the course of some time, I found Strike Debt, I think. I think that it had already started at that point, kind of a couple months in.
And sorry, for our audience that doesn't know, what is Strike Debt?
It was a debt-focused working group. So Occupy was full of these working groups and these projects. And so we were a working group focused on the fact that we were all in debt. Almost everyone who was at Occupy was in debt.
And Astra at the time was starting to organize a telethon where they were going to raise money for the Rolling Jubilee. So I remember, I think she gave me a call and was like, do you want to help out with this telethon? We're trying to raise some money that we'll then use to buy up debt on the secondary market and cancel it. And I think that was our first real conversation. And then we had a lunch, and we just realized we had a lot in common, and have stayed good friends ever since.
I sometimes wish we had a story of meeting on the barricades or something, though. It would be great.
But it kind of was the barricades. Like, I think it was the barricades. It's just in our, 21st century world where like telethons are the new uprising tactic.
So I have been in an immense, I don't know how to say it, just the ticking clock of the oligarchy, right? They have pushed us too far, way too far. And I've been researching a lot of the French Revolution to be like, let's see how we fix this. But the reality of the French Revolution is the same lesson of genocides. You can't make your enemy go away by mass murdering them. Because what ended up happening, they beheaded Marie Antoinette and all her friends. But then Napoleon's wife, Josephine, came in and spent even more of the stolen taxpayer money on her dresses and things and so on. And France was just stuck with the elites for so long, just enriching themselves off the people. So what I'm saying is the guillotine is not the solution here. And this year, 2024, has been the largest number of layoffs in media, and that includes filmmaking, since the 2008 global economic crash. The conversations I'm having with friends across media, across filmmaking, is absolutely devastating. Like, we're talking about all moving in together like they did in the Soviet Union. My family back in the Soviet Union and my friends who got the hell out of the Soviet Union and came here, they would talk about living like all these families crammed into an apartment. And we're having those conversations today because of hyper-capitalism in America. And you just see it in New York City, like the idiots on Fox News, Russian state TV Fox News, want to blame crime. They want to blame non-white people. No, it's the tax dodging. It's all these legalized, sophisticated schemes to avoid paying taxes and so on, with all these vulnerable people falling through the cracks of that, and our schools and libraries being squeezed. So I live with absolute fury and anxiety that my family does not need over just how deeply, increasingly vulnerable we are. And the Democrats, the establishment Dems, are bought off by the same people as the Republicans. And they get in these fights with each other to distract us and create these little culture wars and these Twitter clapbacks so people aren't really focused on what's really going on, our collective good. And your book, Solidarity, is all about that. It's like, no, we don't have to like each other. We don't have to vacation with each other, but we do need to focus on our shared goals and our common grounds. I know this is a lot I'm throwing at you, and I know I promised you a therapy session, and this is very much what this is, but could you just please walk us through this moment of time, and where are we supposed to go from here? Where is the hope to get us out of this immense, crushing crisis?
I mean, the problem of oligarchy is as old as the potential and possibility of democracy. It makes me think of the ancient Greeks, who didn't invent the process or the habit of democracy, but gave us that word, which is demos, the people, plus kratos, power. They also gave us the word oligarchy, which is rule by a few. And so these have always been in tension. And what that shows us is, from the very beginning, people were aware that the concentration of wealth was anathema to the democratic project, to the project of sharing power broadly. And that's why Leah and I went to Occupy Wall Street. It was like such a relief to hear a group of people saying the banks got bailed out, we got sold out, we don't have a representative system, our political system is captured, and that we want democracy. And that word democracy is what united all of the different movements across the world at that time, from the Arab Spring to the movement of the squares. So democracy, I think, is certainly under threat. What Leah and I are saying is that before we can have democracy, which is collective self-rule, self-government, we actually have to have solidarity. That solidarity is actually a precursor to democracy. If we don't see our lives as interlinked, if we don't have social bonds that are robust enough, if we don't have communities that transcend our identities, but that connect us to other groups, other individuals, and other communities, then we actually can't salvage the democratic project. And so we think solidarity is something that, is actually really essential. It's more than just a slogan. And the French Revolution was problematic, as you said, but they were aware of this. They were, they kind of set the stage for the concept of solidarity with their tripartite model: equality, freedom, and fraternity. And the fraternity was this relational concept that eventually evolved into solidarity. That's one of the things we trace in the book.
We're living still with the hangover of the Reagan Revolution, with astronomical levels of income inequality, and that wealth and power just exponentially grows, that it seems impossible to come out from under this. I mean, look at the richest man in the world, or he was as of recently, Elon Musk, taking over a town square of Twitter and turning it into a Nazi viper den. So what hope do you see in this current moment of time for us to rebuild from here and strengthen the social safety net, build a greater economic fairness in the system, and strengthen our democracy in the process? What hope do you have right now?
Yeah, I know it might seem weird to be so hopeful, given that so much seems like it's falling apart. But our book really is hopeful and, not optimistic in the sense that we just think things are going to turn out okay, but hopeful in that deeper sense of we still need to do a lot of really hard work, but there are reasons to keep going. And I see a lot of reasons, actually. I mean, the past 15 years, since Astra and I met 14 years ago, I guess, in 2011, we've seen so many social movements develop. And from the climate movement and the movement for Black lives, immigration rights movements. And yes, we have seen a lot of backlash, and it's been really, really hard. But you can't deny that people are striving together. They're coming together, they're finding each other, they're building, they're organizing. And we will always, there'll always be obstacles, and backlash is something we really have to begin to understand more deeply and really contend with and kind of factor into our strategies. But, right now, I think we're in the midst of seeing a real labor revival. And what's exciting is that I'm seeing in this moment a revival in the labor movement that incorporates a lot of the racial justice and gender justice and environmental justice elements of the past decade into this kind of new moment where, the UAW is coming out for a ceasefire and organizing battery plants and, standing up for climate change in a way that, the auto industry wasn't always for or actively organized against. And I think coming back to the concept of solidarity, I believe that we have a desire for belonging. Like, one of the fundamental aspects of being human is the desire to belong with others, to a community, to be held in community and seen and understood. And that's not going to go away, even in the face of the rising oligarchy, people will still continue to crave that and will continue to fight for that. And things just change, I had a kid recently, and one thing everyone said was, nothing stays the same. Like, whatever problem you're facing right now around not sleeping or teething or whatever, it's going to be that problem's going to go away and a different problem will arise, but things will change. And so I think that we just have to keep in the fight, keep struggling. And just the one thing we really have to avoid is a sense of nihilism, a sense of powerlessness. And I know these are hard things to avoid because they are kind of pressed on us from all sides. But that's, I think, our biggest task, is to avoid that sense of despair and just stay in the struggle.
And how do you sustain that, especially when it just feels like so much of the corruption that we're up against in America is legalized corruption? These shell companies and dark money groups. The Russians were basically able to use all of our own weaknesses against us in bringing Trump to power in 2016. I was just reminded of that reading an old interview that we did here on the show with Craig Unger, who wrote this great book, House of Trump, House of Putin. And it's true. America, one of the most powerful economic engines in the world, and yet you have so many people slipping through the cracks. I know I'm repeating myself now at this point, but it's just, I can't tolerate this anymore. And I feel like we've become so numb to it and going about our business and just tolerating what should be intolerable. So what concrete steps would you recommend for us to take our economic power back, and especially from a democratic establishment that just seems increasingly out of touch?
I think it is good to take an honest look at the terrain. So part of why we feel so powerless, and part of why the powers of oligarchy have gained steam, is that people are disorganized, and we've been actively disorganized. I mean, over the last years, unions have been purposefully decimated. Community groups have been replaced with sort of professional nonprofit advocacy groups. We have a culture of individualism and consumerism that encourages us to think of ourselves as lone actors. I've written in the past about the difference between activism and organizing. You can be an activist on your own, raising your voice, raising awareness. But organizing is something that you actually have to do with other people. You can't be an organizer on your own. And so Leah and I have often said that our book ultimately is a kind of manifesto for organizing. And that's what solidarity enables us to do. Solidarity, again, is it's about the relationships between people. It's about the bonds between us. And we see it as both a means and an end. So solidarity is a means of building organizational power. It's also a way of describing the world we want to build and want to see. We want to see a solidaristic society where people don't fall through the cracks, where, corruption isn't legalized. There are many books out there that provide diagnoses that sort of lay out the problems. And then there's like a chapter at the end that's like, here's all the policies that could hypothetically fix things, we should ungerrymander, we should reform campaign finance, et cetera, et cetera. But solidarity is the middle step. It's like, how do you get from the diagnosis to the solution? And we do it through the hard work of organizing. And so for me, I stay hopeful. I see hope as a discipline. I stay hopeful by trying to build collective power. I mean, I think the importance of rebuilding organized labor can't be overstated. There are groups like Indivisible. There are your local Democratic Socialists of America chapters. There are local tenants unions. Anything you can do with others in an organized fashion that's trying to build sustained small d democratic power, I think is really critical. I write a bit in our book about my role with the Debt Collective, which is an experimental union of debtors. So we're modeled on the labor union. The idea is that many of us are in debt today. We have to debt finance things like education and healthcare and housing, and that our debts are actually, they can be a form of economic leverage if we get organized. So we've been pushing the Democratic Party to cancel student debt as a kind of pilot project for this theory of change. And it's been working. And now we have a movement of tens of thousands of debtors who feel less alone and less alienated. And even when there are setbacks, I think people still feel that disciplined, realistic kind of hope, because we know that this is the only way. It's the slow, sometimes tedious, I'll admit it, work of getting folks together with a shared agenda. And, that's what we have to do. But I think there can be real political benefits from that. But I actually think it's how, by doing the work, you create a feedback loop. And that to me is where hope comes from. It's credible hope, the hope of doing the work of organizing in community.
I really agree with all that. The last chapter of our book is called Solidarity and the Sacred. And we think about that even in a kind of secular sense. But the idea is to build your life intentionally around the things that you think are important and that are sacred to you, and to develop practices and rituals, and organizing maybe one of those rituals, time in nature. I think it is important to just be intentional about nourishing yourself and reminding yourself of what's important, not getting into the doom scroll and kind of the negative feedback loops, but finding ways to create routines, build in habits that bring you into positive contact with other people, into projects that feel constructive. Starting local is almost trite to say, but I think it's really important, is to just start small, find something where you feel like you can have an impact, or a small group of people that you can do a project with. And like Astra said, it's just sort of in that work, there can be a lot of nourishment. And we also talk about sort of the virtues of solidarity. And when I was back in graduate school, one of my favorite philosophers was Aristotle, and he writes about the virtues of a just person. To create a just city, you need just people, which is actually an idea that we've sort of abandoned. We've kind of tried to construct a world where you can have justice without regard for the character of who we are as individual people. But we actually kind of want to reclaim the idea that thinking about our own individual character is really important to the broader project of creating a more just society. And so some of the virtues, in addition to keeping up hope, we talk about courage and humility, hospitality, justice, and other aspects that we think it's important to kind of cultivate in ourselves. And I do think hope is one of those. We've just got to hold on to it.
Yeah, as Harvey Milk said, the ultimate community organizer, Harvey Milk, you've got to give them hope. And so what I love about your book, Solidarity, is how you trace the history of solidarity and give all these concrete examples of people power, all these different factions coming together to build coalitions. And I've talked about that on the show for years, that there's no other way than through coalition building. Nobody gets into heaven alone. We all need each other. For you, what were some of the most inspiring examples from history that really stay with you in your work?
Well, one that I've liked recently, since we all kind of hate Elon Musk is the organizing around Tesla that's been happening in like Denmark, Norway, Sweden. I think it was Swedish factory mechanics went on strike, and then the postal service stopped delivering the Tesla license plates, and then the trash stopped collecting trash from the Tesla factory, and then the Danish pension fund divested, and it was just really amazing. My facts might be a little fuzzy at this point, but really amazing solidarity that actually is in the United States. Solidarity strikes like that are illegal, which is horrible and devastating. Our labor law is so bad. But I think that's an example of just the kind of ripple effect of ways that different kind of industries can organize together towards a common end.
Yeah, and related to that, I mean, I think one thing I sort of knew, but we really try to bring it out in the book, and I think it's really important, is that so many of the categories that we think with today, even the example Leah just gave of working class people standing together against Tesla, like the idea of the working class is something that had to be invented. And so we, linger on that history of how, as the Industrial Revolution unfolded, working individuals who were then in guilds, who saw themselves as craftsmen, as painters, as potters, as ironsmiths, or what have you, began to see, as the economy changed, that they had something more fundamental in common, that they were workers whose labor was being exploited. And the idea of worker as this broad general category came into view, and the idea of the working class. And those are now just categories we think of. We just think with them and in them without recognizing how they were inventions and how they're actually still evolving. We also trace the development of the disability rights movement. Disability rights activists in the 60s and 70s were inspired by the civil rights activists of the period and said, hey, wow, we're facing related challenges in our lives. We're also subject to discrimination, and we are also marginalized. But disabled people had to do intense amounts of work, and this was really recent. These people, a lot of them are still with us today, saying, I might have a physical disability, you might have, something that's very different than me, but we have something in common. You have cerebral palsy, I have arthroposis, you are an amputee, but we're disabled, and we are part of a community that can have solidarity and fight for structural changes. And thanks to those efforts, we now have the ADA in this country, the American with Disabilities Act, which provides a baseline of protection and accessibility that has improved people's lives. Of course, we could do more. Those stories are part of why Leah and I are hopeful, because we've seen people organize under really arduous conditions, and we've seen the way that these coalitions are built and then become part of the way that we understand the world. And so for us, solidarity it's not identity. It invites us actually to transcend our identities, to invent new ones, to invent new communities, instead of being sort of trapped in our inherited self-conceptions. And I think that's really important. So we emphasize the word transformation in the book. We talk about what we call transformative solidarity, and we contrast that with what we call reactionary solidarity, because there are all sorts of negative, authoritarian, for example, white supremacist or ethno-nationalist forms of solidarity. For us, transformative solidarity is a kind of solidarity that, rather than shrinking the circle of inclusion, aims to expand it, to bust us out of the frameworks that are closing us down and turning us inwards. And that process of building transformative solidarity changes us in the process, and it can also change our political system.
You had mentioned, Leah, and this is a question for both of you, of course, that the U.S. has laws that make it illegal to have solidarity protests, right? I think that's what you said. An example from Denmark, where we couldn't do that in the U.S. because solidarity strikes are illegal. What are some other examples here in the U.S. of how our establishment tries to undermine and prevent our solidarity? What are some examples of other laws and systems in place?
It is important to understand the kind of active campaign against solidarity, so that we recognize that it's not like Americans just don't have it, but that it's actually being actively, intentionally undermined, which means that's something we can fight back against. So I think another reason for hope. But it is depressing to when you start to think about all the ways it's being undermined. So, for example, people have probably been following Cop City, and in Atlanta, the protests around the new police encampment, and in Georgia, they've made the Solidarity Fund that supported protesters. They've called that money laundering, and it basically made it illegal to help get protesters out of jail, to provide bail. So there's this real attack on protest, on protesters, on people's rights. I mean, obviously, we've seen this with the student encampments around Gaza. So real crackdowns on people's right to assemble and protest. There are also just a lot of divide and conquer strategies to kind of pull communities apart. This is not necessarily legal strategies, but narrative strategies that point to particular communities being at fault for the larger economic conditions that we're all living in. Astra, remind me, we have like a whole list, but maybe you can fill in.
Yeah, I mean, we have a list of the ways solidarity is criminalized. I mean, as Leah says, from structure of our labor laws to, you can really see it. We write about it, but it's only intensified with the crackdowns on peaceful protest. I mean, we see some states passing laws that are creating incredible penalties for things like blocking sidewalks, ratcheting them up to felonies or worse. Also, some states are legalizing violence against protesters by saying, that people can drive their vehicles into protests with impunity. We also argue that, anti-trans legislation is a way of breaking solidarity. Certainly the criminalization of abortion, which puts abortion providers or anyone seeking to facilitate an individual who needs reproductive health care, sometimes with offering bounties for them. We see that as a way of breaking solidarity, creating an atmosphere of fear and distrust. And this is all because solidarity is really threatening to the status quo. I mean, that's why these laws are being passed. And that's why there has been a long-standing campaign against solidarity. And I think it's really important for us to be aware of this, especially as we face the prospect of another Trump presidency. He's made it very clear that, he wants to invoke the Insurrection Act, which is this archaic law that would essentially and criminalize anyone protesting at, I don't know, his inauguration or what have you. And so I think these laws they're dangerous, they're intensifying, and we need to name them for what they are, which is, they're not really about people not protesting the right way. They're not only about abortion. They're not only about trans healthcare. They really are about keeping us afraid, about dividing us, about conquering us. We need to understand them as part of a broader pattern.
Absolutely. Could you speak a little bit specifically about the trans issue? Because here you have children, trans people who are being deliberately terrorized and deliberately used by the far right to create a culture war, to divide and conquer. And unfortunately, it's also dividing many on the left who are now chiming in with their own opinions because the scare tactics are working. It's such a deeply divisive culture war that loses sight of the very innocent people and their families, their loved ones that are targets of it. And I hear about this from our listeners across the country, some of them in some of the reddest of so-called red states. And unfortunately, I've even heard from members of our community who have fallen victim to that disinformation and the fear campaigns and scapegoating. What is your advice there to our community, to Americans right now, especially, who are being mind hacked over this horrible issue, this horrible deliberately engineered culture war? What advice do you have for them to sort of focus on what's essential here, focus on human rights and equity, and focus on solidarity? How do we build solidarity from this?
It's important to step back and look at the strategy and the larger dynamic that's at play. Every couple years, Republicans choose a different population to target, to kind of pinpoint as a threat. whether it's migrants, whether it's women, whether it's gay people, Black people, now it's trans people. And essentially I feel like, lure Democrats into this game of, will you or will you not throw this community under the bus? And too often Democrats fall for it. And every cycle, it's the political establishment is basically like, which community in our coalition can we throw under the bus and get away with that? And I think that that's what we really have to understand, that these are strategies of the right to divide us and to make some people feel superior to others, to make people feel scared about change, about difference. And it is our task, for those of us who believe in the possibility of a more inclusive, open society, it's our task to resist that, to recognize it for what it is, and to just keep standing together. I think there are often actually positive political consequences when we do that. Remind me if I'm wrong, but in North Carolina, the effort to create those bathroom bills, I think, backfired. And often it can backfire, and Republicans can back off when we show that we're not moving and that we're gonna hang together.
Thing is, the strategy of throwing coalition members under the bus, I mean, it's so disheartening. It's very disheartening as someone who leans towards the Democratic side of the political spectrum to feel like when Trump's in power, everybody has their signs in their lawns saying, no one's illegal. But right now, Biden is boasting about this executive order, which is, making it difficult for people to apply for asylum, which is a core part of domestic and international law. And then, liberals are silent. So I think solidarity is a framework that transcends the partisan, right? I mean, we're in this partisan polarization where it's like what the Democrats do, the Republicans boo. What the Republicans do, the Democrats boo, even as they kind of lock arms on certain issues. So we need ways of talking and organizing that break us out of that dynamic, that keep a kind of moral position, I think, front and center, which is, this position of inclusivity, that we need to build a multiracial, inclusive democracy. And that to have a real democracy, again, we need to tackle the concentration of wealth and the concentration of the power that wealth buys. We cite the work of a scholar named Ian Haney Lopez, and I think it's worth mentioning his work, which Leah knows more about, but he does something called the race-class narrative. And it's a way of talking to people about these issues and to essentially put front and center the way that race is wielded by people in power, by economic and political elites to divide us. And when you phrase things that way, his research shows it really opens people's minds up. Instead of seeing race as just this kind of essentialist thing and this longstanding battle, between Black people and white people in this zero-sum game, he shows the way that it is wielded to undermine solidarity. And so I think, it would be wonderful if the Democrats were leaning into that kind of framework and leading with a kind of inclusive populism that calls out the special interests who want us to be divided and conquered, instead of trying to steal from the right's playbook, which, they just can't out-compete the Republicans on hating immigrants and hating minorities. It's not going to happen.
Bouge ton corps, ton cœur, ton allure, ton espace, ta devanture. Bouge adossé en t'étendant, pour ton bien, c'est évident. Bouge tes os, ta masse, ta structure, tes côtes, ton ossature. Bouge en cadence et en élan, c'est égal tant que c'est lent. Bouge en effort, en à-coup, en dur, en sueur, en démesure. Bouge à bout de souffle en étant souple verticalement. Bouge ta chair, tes tissus, tes mots, ton enveloppe puis ta peau. Bouge en profondeur en avant, secoue les gouttes de ton sang. Bouge en deux temps, de temps en temps. Le mouvement c'est vivant pour faire circuler l'air de rire, la joie, la colère, le chagrin. Bouge en deux temps, de temps en temps. Le mouvement c'est du vent, du souffle, où te poser l'hiver quand tu remues tes chairs. Solide ton mot, tes peurs, la lumière au fond de ton cœur. Bouge à changer de poids, de plein, de chaleur au creux de terrain. Bouge en force, en fureur, à transpirer ton odeur. Bouge à dépasser le chagrin, le goût sucré de tes mains. Bouge à côté de toi en hurlant que tes cellules brûlent dans la fumée de tes pas tout corps chaud. Il te suffira de boire de l'eau. Bouge en dedans, en dehors, en étant aligné, consistant. Bouge à déloger l'océan, que tes veines coulent à flanc. Bouge en dedans, de temps en temps. Le mouvement c'est vivant pour faire circuler l'air de rien, la joie, la colère, le chagrin. Bouge en de temps en temps. Le mouvement c'est du vent, du souffle, où te poser l'hiver quand tu remues tes chairs.
This election is here and it's happening, and it's bigger than Biden. We have the chance to hack away at corruption at the root by building our power at the all-important state level, where crucial quality of life issues, from voting rights to environmental protections to LGBTQ+ rights and more, are decided. Karl Rove ran the same strategy for the GOP during the Obama years, laying the groundwork for Trump to come to power in 2016. Now we're reversing this dangerous trend, securing key victories in swing states to protect our elections and advance progressive laws in states like Michigan and Wisconsin. Yes, even Wisconsin. Another world is possible when we unite and build together. Here's how. Join me, Andrea, at State Fair, a giving circle that collects small dollar donations among friends and family to build big power in key states. If 1,000 Gaslit Nation listeners set up a $5 recurring monthly donation, that's $5,000 we're sending to turn so-called red states purple and so-called purple states blue. Some of the races we've supported won by only a few votes. And we flipped the House in Pennsylvania, flipped the entire House, all right? Elected like 12 new people, massive. And they have a crazy, extra crazy Republican Party in Pennsylvania. And that's what we did together through States Project. Thank you. Your $5 monthly donation will make a huge difference. Join me and my friends at State Fair today. You can sign up at gaslitnationpod.com. Just click on the 2024 Survival Guide on our homepage. Step number 2, are there any young people in your life, Gen Z or younger? Give them the gift of the excellent book, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. It helps people of all ages run for office. So if you're thinking of running for office, be sure to read this inspiring and practical guide. Both the book and the organization, Run for Something, encourage, recruit, and train young people to run for office and flex their power. Inspire a young person and anyone you love and trust with empathy in their hearts and science in their minds to run for office today. Number 3, help The Helpers. State Bridges is a sister district action network program in which volunteers from across the country fundraise for organizations doing year-round power building in key battleground states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. State Bridges supports organizations engaging communities underrepresented at the polls, like mothers of color, rural voters, and Latinx voters. Sign up to attend a virtual fundraiser and donate to help the helpers at State Bridges. Number 4, write letters to voters in swing districts with Vote Forward. Check out any of their easy letter writing campaigns that have already started and write letters as you listen to Gaslit Nation. We'll be keeping you company. Most importantly, number 5, check your own voter registration now at election protection site vote.org. Make sure you're registered and check in with your family and friends to confirm their voter registration too. Commit to helping 5 people in your life make a plan to vote and bring them along to a Gaslit Nation phone bank this fall, because the only ones coming to save us is us. Grassroots power is the most reliable power we have left. Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level and higher on Patreon at patreon.com/gaslit. It's Pride Month. On behalf of everyone here at Gaslit Nation, we extend a happy Pride to all of our listeners in the LGBTQ+ community. You and your loved ones are not alone in this time of genocidal hate. The Gaslit Nation community has your back, and wherever you are listening, we love you. You're perfect. We're going to get through these dark times together. To help us do that, let's all come together and support these worthy organizations doing extremely important work for human rights. Lambda Legal is committed to achieving full recognition of civil rights for LGBTQ+ people and everyone living with HIV, to ensure legal protections and to end discrimination. Donate at lambdalegal.org. That's lambdalegal.org. And Lambda Legal also provides free services from those impacted who need the support. Trans Lifeline provides trans peer support that's been divested from police since day one. They're run by and for trans people. Donate at translifeline.org. That's translifeline.org. The Audre Lorde Project is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, two-spirit, trans and gender, non-conforming, people of color community organizing center focusing on the New York City area. Donate at alp.org. That's alp.org. The U.S. has the highest rate of maternal mortality than any other developed country. Christian nationalists, backed by the oil and coal lobby, worsen this crisis with their authoritarian abortion bans. Donate to the Women's Reproductive Rights Assistance Project that provides support to those who need an abortion or emergency contraceptives. Donate at wrrap.org. That's wrrap.org. To help get Ukraine urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To help civilians and refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans, yes, that's how you say it, already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our production manager is Nicholas Torres. And our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres. And our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Taj Easton and Carlin Daigle. And a big warm welcome to Gaslit Nation's first ever artist in residence who will be with us through the summer of 2024, getting us ready for victory on November 5th. A big Gaslit Nation welcome to Jerica Miguel, the wonderful singer-songwriter. You can find her work at Jerica Miguel. That's JerikaMighelle.com. Her music is incredibly haunting. You heard it on the show at the very end of May, and you'll hear it again, getting us ready for the election. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Work for Better, Prep for Trouble, that's right, Lily Wachowski, John Schoenthaler, Ellen McGirt, Larry Gasson, D. Scott, Ann Bertino, David East, Joseph Mara Jr., Mark, Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, Kevin Gannon, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Goldstad, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, Ann Marshall, D.L. Sinkfield, Nicole Spear, Abby Road, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Sarah Gray, Diana Gallagher, Leah Campbell, Jared Lombardo, Ann Marshall, Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.